When my wife, Evelyn Foster, passed away, my son, Cameron Blake, told me, "You can't bring Mom back, and Laura's birthday only happens once per year." Hearing those words from Cameron struck me hard, leaving me stunned. Early the following day, Cameron approached me with an important favor, acting as though nothing difficult had transpired. This moment felt like my opportunity to mend things for the pain Cameron had caused me and for what he'd done to Evelyn, and I grabbed hold of it. My hands began to shake as I called Cameron at 8:15 a.m., repositioning my black tie for the third attempt. Evelyn's abandoned coffee mug rested on the kitchen counter, her lipstick still barely visible on its edge. Without her cheerful humming in the morning, the kitchen seemed strangely lifeless. The phone rang 4 times until I heard Cameron's drowsy greeting. "Yeah, son, it's me," I announced, standing up a little straighter. "The funeral's at 11:15, I stated, raising my voice. Music pulsed on the other end of the line, and I could hear laughter rippling behind the noise. Laura's voice squealed about some decorations. Cameron cleared his throat. "Alan, I told you the previous day. Laura's birthday party is tonight. We've been planning this for months." His words hit me with a cold shock. I squeezed the receiver, my knuckles white. "Your mother's funeral is today, Cameron. This only happens once in a lifetime. Listen, my mother isn't coming back, but my wife's birthday comes around just once a year. Caterers are arriving. The band is loading in their gear. My wife dedicated 33 years to raising our son, and I'm grateful for that. But I can't just leave Laura alone on her birthday. You get it, right?" The hum of the dial tone lingered on the line. I sat without moving for a full 2 minutes, my eyes locked on Evelyn's reading glasses next to the telephone. The kitchen clock read 8:59 a.m. My wedding band flashed in the morning light, streaming through windows she had cleaned a week ago. I found the funeral bulletin on the counter and saw my son, Cameron Blake, listed as a pallbearer. With careful, firm strokes, I used my pen to erase his name. At the cemetery, all eyes turned in anticipation. Where was Cameron? Clarice Morton, my wife's sister, asked repeatedly. In my head, I kept rehearsing my reply, pressing obligations. Every syllable tasted bitter in my mouth. 23 guests arrived to remember my wife of 39 years. Our son was absent. Alone, I stood by the casket, surrounded by Evelyn's garden club companions and our longtime neighbors. The gap where my son, Cameron Blake, should have been loomed impossibly large. Evelyn had always been tremendously proud of him. Randall leaned in close and murmured, always boasting about what he'd achieved. I managed a nod, my throat constricting painfully. Evelyn had defended Cameron right up to her final moments. She would insist that he was just caught up in the excitement of his new chapter when he didn't show for her chemo treatments. She said, young married couples need freedom. The minister spoke of family ties and love that last beyond this life. The seat next to me, where Evelyn used to ride, seemed impossibly empty. She'd never let us drive my pickup, always insisting we use her little Honda. She said it was better for the planet. The radio played a tune she loved most. I switched it off. The street looked unchanged, trimmed grass, colorful mailboxes, the familiar world we had created side by side. I steered into the driveway and waited a few seconds, trying to summon the courage to step into the empty house. The key in the front door made the same old, comforting sound. I hung my keys on the hook Evelyn had put up herself, a small daily gesture that felt enormous without her there. No sounds drifted from the kitchen, no TV murmured in the background. Only the house itself settled around 39 years' worth of shared memories. I loosened the black tie at my neck and collapsed into my favorite chair, the brown leather armchair that Evelyn always claimed clashed with her floral curtains, or so she always said. She had wanted to redo the decor for years, but I was always consumed by the demands of getting the business off the ground. Now those curtains would remain indefinitely. Our wedding photograph grinned from the mantelpiece. Evelyn was just 23, glowing in her grandmother's gown. We tied the knot right here in Eugene, pledging everything we owned to each other. I kept that vow. Maybe I kept it too completely. All those memories came rushing back, unwelcome. I remember Cameron taking his first steps right here in this same living room, his little hands reaching for Evelyn's waiting arms. We held birthday celebrations decorated with crafts because store-bought ones weren't in our budget. Evelyn pulled double shifts at Sunrise Cafe, while I set up Bramwell Contracting. She never voiced a complaint, Not even during those 14-hour days I put in at work, and not even when macaroni and cheese became our meal for weeks at a stretch. "We're doing this for Cameron," she would murmur to me, after he'd drifted off to sleep between us in bed. Still too young for a room of his own. I came across her Bible on the nightstand, its bookmarks still marking passages in Psalms. A handwritten message slipped out. "My beloved Alan, please don't let Cameron forget who we are. We devoted everything we owned to him. I pray that it was sufficient. With all my love, Evelyn." My hands trembled as I took in her meticulous handwriting. Inside the closet, I found the special box she'd carefully tucked away. Cameron's report cards were preserved, spanning from kindergarten through university. Each A+ felt like a triumph, every milestone cherished. She had added small comments on all of them. "So very proud. Our gifted son." The graduation snapshot stung the deepest. Cameron dressed in his cap and gown. That degree was funded thanks to Evelyn's extra hours and my weekend shifts. The total came to $175,000. While his proud smile glowed, he never recognized the efforts that paved his path. I reached for my calculator and began tallying the down payment I'd contributed for Cameron's house, $240,000. His marriage to Laura cost $32,000. The first car I bought for my son cost $32,000. And for the graduate program he insisted on but never applied to, I paid $40,000. There were also emergency loans that were supposed to cover trips. Then there were Laura's unsuccessful shopping sprees and other failed pursuits. Evelyn's coffee cup remained untouched in the dishwasher. Her romance book still lay open on the bedside table, the bookmark patiently waiting for eyes that would never return to read. Well wishes from friends filled every inch of the kitchen counter, friends who had shown more concern in her final months than my own child, Cameron. The totals just kept growing. Over 13 years, Cameron's total amounted to $750,000. Nearly $1 million from our lives, given freely out of faith and love. I thought about my own father, Charles Foster, a stern man who offered me nothing but the challenge to forge my own success. "Shape your own character," he'd always told me. Maybe he wasn't wrong. Shadows deepened outside. I made no move to turn on any lights. A vehicle rolled up the driveway and sat idling with the engine running. I stayed put and didn't look out. If my son intended to speak, he knew exactly where I'd be. The engine picked up and the car left. At 5:35 in the early morning, I found myself at my polished mahogany desk, meticulously laying out file folders in neat, deliberate lines. Cameron Blake's schooling, Cameron's house, Cameron's wedding. While the mug on my desk cooled, I launched the calculator app and started performing the tally that Evelyn had always been too gentle to request. The lenses of my reading glasses reflected the glow of my computer as I sifted through our Summit State Bank statements. 13 years of records, each entry tagged with "Transfer to Cameron" or "Emergency Loan Cameron." The paper made a soft shuffling noise in the stillness of my altered world. Those small sounds echoed in what my existence had recently become. First came the university bills, 3 years at $45,000 each. I can clearly remember sitting down to write out those payments, while Evelyn took on extra hours to keep up with our own expenses, as our son partied away at Oregon State University. Next, I stared down the total for graduate school, an additional $40,000 for an MBA. Cameron never completed, choosing instead to drop out in search of himself in Europe. The trip overseas, $32,000. "Just for a little while, Dad, until I figure things out." Funding the home nearly caused us to go under. When I was 25, I stood in our living room and slipped Laura's ring onto her finger. We discovered the ideal house, though we were slightly short on the initial payment, $240,000. I agreed to be a co-signer for the mortgage and paid the entire down payment myself. "Family sticks together," Cameron had remarked, embracing me firmly. "I'll repay you as soon as my business is up and running." Which business was that? Ever since finishing college, my son Cameron had been employed by me, collecting a paycheck he didn't truly earn, picking up abilities I hoped he would someday appreciate. Evelyn Foster's hidden notebook suddenly dropped out of the files. Written in her hand were records of all our sacrifices. Our anniversary dinner was canceled. We needed $4,500 to fix Cameron's car. I delayed my own visit to the doctor. Cameron's wedding bills exceeded what we'd planned for. We only bought store-brand groceries these past few days. I sent Cameron some cash for Laura's birthday. Her final entry hurt the most. We did everything for Cameron. I pray he'll look back on us with warmth. The numbers on the calculator kept rising. $750,000, well over $750,000. Alan Foster had pressed $25 into my hand as I left home, hidden in a handshake. Everything I had, I built from scratch, and Cameron saw the whole thing as his birthright to enjoy, while Evelyn and I were still around. I recalled him calling Bramwell Contracting a family business during the past holiday season, speaking as though he had built it with me instead of stepping into a prepared role. Laura gave me an approving look, already plotting out ways to spend the earnings I'd accumulated with 39 years of hard work. Instinctively, I shifted into a business frame of mind. This felt like an issue I needed to address head-on, not a sorrow to be soothed. I had let myself get too caught up in my feelings, repeatedly justifying actions that Evelyn Foster had privately confessed made her anxious. "Perhaps we're giving him too much leeway," she'd murmured following Cameron's most recent crisis. Her picture gazed at me from the desk corner as I gathered the files. Rising to my feet with a new determination, I noticed something tougher than heartache settling inside me. "You were right to be concerned," I thought as I gazed at her photograph. The phone began to ring. Cameron's name appeared on my caller ID. I watched as it rang 4 times before I finally picked up and said, "Hey, Dad. Hope you're all right after the previous day." Cameron's voice had that bright, upbeat quality, the one he used whenever he was about to ask for a favor. I realized he steered clear of mentioning the funeral directly. He never brought up how I was handling things without Evelyn. "I'm getting by." I made sure to keep my voice calm as I stared down at the mess of financial paperwork strewn over my desk. "That's good. That's good. So, the reason I'm calling is we ran into some surprise expenses. Laura's celebration was fantastic, but we kind of overdid it. You get it. Turning 31 only happens once, right?" Behind him, I caught Laura's voice. I told him about the musicians. We brought in this amazing live band and took everyone to the new steakhouse in downtown Eugene. I got Laura a beautiful diamond bracelet. She really deserves the best. However, the credit card statements have started arriving, and we're now facing about $12,500 that need to be paid right away. $12,500? I did the math in my head. Loan number 41 at 13 years. The previous day I had laid my wife, Evelyn Foster, to rest. Now, my son, Cameron Blake, was asking for money to throw a party. "Could you send the money to my account today?" Laura, Cameron's wife, is feeling overwhelmed by the expenses, and you know how she reacts when she gets anxious. The pause between us seemed to go on endlessly. My eyes drifted to the picture of Evelyn, then landed on the tidy columns of figures showing Cameron's complete financial impact on my marriage. Silence followed. Then I asked, "What do you mean, no? Is there an issue at the bank? I mean, no, Cameron. I'm not giving you any more financial support." Suddenly the upbeat tone vanished from my voice. "Are you honestly turning me down right now after everything we've dealt with over the past few days?" Everything we've dealt with? As if he'd been the one hurt through Evelyn's funeral, instead of treating it as a celebration. "You're 33 years old, Cameron? So, what does that have to do with getting my son out of trouble? It's not as though I'm short on funds." Laura's voice rose up from the background. "Mention that we need that money. We've already used it." But I refused. Those words felt awkward on my lips. It was the first time I had ever said no to Cameron about anything. I couldn't believe it was happening. His tone suddenly turned icy. "Mom just passed away and you're quibbling about finances. She would want you to support us." The way he manipulated was almost effortless, as if he'd rehearsed it for years. How many times had he pulled this same tactic? How often had Evelyn and I given in the moment he appealed to family obligations? But don't count on us to come by very often anymore if you're going to act like this. That warning lingered between us. For all these years, that routine had never failed. My son's visits always felt like a reward for my generosity. He stayed away whenever the answer was no. "I hear you," I replied evenly. "You what?" he asked. "I said I hear you. Take care, Cameron." I ended the call before he could say another word. My phone sat quietly on my desk, no longer a tool for anyone to control me. After all this time, it was the first time I finished a conversation with my son, Cameron, in a way that truly belonged to me. I lifted the lid of my laptop and brought up my son's personnel record. Early the following day, we had a different sort of discussion, one that belonged in the office, with me as the supervisor, not as a parent who hadn't kept those roles separate. If Cameron intended to treat me like a mere colleague, I decided I would respond in an equally businesslike manner. At 6:45 a.m., I passed through Bramwell Contracting's lobby, exactly 2 hours before Cameron's typical arrival. His staff photo was displayed on the management wall, showing him in a suit I had purchased and looking self-assured. Today, I gazed at that photograph with a different perspective, recognizing a sense of entitlement rather than the ambition I once admired. Inside my office, Cameron's personnel folders were scattered across my desk like exhibits in a legal proceeding. 7 years of employment documentation presented the unvarnished truth. I dealt with missed deadlines, dissatisfied contractors, overstated expense claims, and projects that stalled because I chose lengthy lunches over proper on-site oversight. My nonchalant approach to obligations also harmed my relationships with clients. I had rationalized every bit of it. Family bonds and Evelyn Foster's soft-spoken assurances that Cameron was still figuring things out were always present. Yet these papers made it clear there was a consistent record of professional irresponsibility that would have led to someone else's dismissal years earlier. At 9:05 a.m., I summoned Abigail Price to my office. As HR director, she would need to oversee the paperwork according to protocol. Her expression betrayed no shock as I described my choice. I had been keeping track of Cameron Blake's workplace violations for several months, just waiting for my moment to intervene. "I'll get the dismissal paperwork ready right away," Abigail Price said in a hush. There would be a security escort. Yes, that was the usual process when letting go of managers. I went through my speech in front of the office mirror, observing myself as I calmly delivered the carefully chosen phrases. I wouldn't let any feelings slip, nor would I say more than the legal guidelines required. Cameron was about to walk in here as both my son and my subordinate, but within minutes he would leave as a dismissed employee. At 9:50, Cameron sauntered in, a quarter of an hour behind schedule, cracking jokes with the receptionist about still feeling rough from my wife's celebration. His laughter filled the lobby, prompting uneasy glances toward my shut office door from the rest of the staff. I heard him pause to pour his coffee, totally unaware of what was about to happen. "Cameron, please come to my office right away." My voice rang over the intercom with a newfound sense of command. Cameron cheerfully called back down the hall, "Okay, Dad. Just let me get my coffee first." "Now, Cameron," I insisted, and the silence that hung after my words was telling. It let me know he was aware something had shifted. The sound of his footsteps drew near, slower and heavier than they usually were. When he pushed my door open and noticed Abigail Price waiting with documents, the smile faded from his face. "Why all this formality?" he asked, trying to speak in his normal, relaxed manner, but I could hear the doubt underneath. I stayed where I was, my hands together on the desktop. "Cameron, your job with Bramwell Contracting is terminated immediately." My laugh rang hollow. "All right, very funny, Alan. What's going on?" I pushed the termination documents across the gleaming desk. "Look over these papers and sign wherever it's marked," I said. He lifted them as if they were scorching, his fingers tense. He looked over the legal text, the color draining from his complexion. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was my family's company. I told Cameron, keeping my voice steady and professional, that my decision was based on his recent job performance and professional behavior. His role was being cut as part of the company reorganization. "This is about the call from the previous day, isn't it?" My voice faltered just a bit. "Listen, I'm sorry about the money issue. We'll figure this out. Security will take you to gather your belongings." Cameron's expression shifted from shock to pleading. "Evelyn wouldn't want this, and you know she wouldn't," he said, leaning in, hoping to stir up the familiar guilt that usually influenced me. I pressed the security call. This was a business choice, not something personal. Wes Carter appeared at the door, looking both professional and understanding. My cheeks turned crimson as it dawned on me how truly embarrassing this was. "Please consider the consequences." I looked him in the eyes for the first time that day. I have. From my office window, I watched as he packed up his meager assortment of personal items into his car. His shoulders quivered, though I couldn't tell if it was from anger or anguish. I looked away as he cast one final glance at the building. Abigail Price returned with the completed documents, Every access code had been updated. His computer privileges have been revoked. I personally took my son's photo off the leadership wall and set it face down in a drawer. The resulting void on the wall seemed somehow neater. My assistant gave a gentle tap at the door. "Mister, there's someone here who arrived without an appointment." The sound of designer shoes echoed sharply over the marble floors of the lobby. Laura Blake swept past the front desk with no intention of waiting, my meticulously done hair slightly windblown. I watched as Cameron trailed behind her, appearing ashamed and crushed, a mere shadow of the self-assured person who had walked in just an hour before. How could I disgrace Cameron like this? Laura's voice rang out as she jabbed a finger through my open office doorway, pointing at me. I stayed put in my chair, refusing to acknowledge her dramatic arrival. Cameron Blake stepped between Laura and my desk, discomfort clear on his face. "Laura, let me deal with this," he pleaded. She paid no attention to him whatsoever. "We have expenses, Alan. We were used to a certain standard of living. Cameron was entitled to this business as much as anyone." "This is a private office," I responded quietly. "You must go now." Her cheeks grew even more crimson. "We're entitled to at least 7 months of severance. Cameron has worked here for 7 years. You're obligated to us." Cameron's feeble efforts to mediate were ignored. "Alan, could we please discuss this in private?" "No," Laura interrupted sharply. "He needs to listen. I'm familiar with wrongful dismissal laws." "My son's position was at will," I answered evenly. "Just a resentful old man unleashing your sorrow on us." Cameron's complexion turned pale. "Laura, I need you to stop saying that." My jaw clenched, yet I kept my cool. I knew perfectly well this was the response I'd get from her. It was just manipulation, wrapped up to look like justified outrage. Cameron struggled frantically to take charge again. I said, "Alan, I realize I handled the funeral poorly. I apologize, but ending my profession can't bring Evelyn back. Consider what this means for all of us, and for the grandchildren to come." The words lingered in the room, much like smoke from an extinguishing flame. I regarded this man who shared my genetics, but not one of my principles. "Family?" Laura quickly intensified her financial threats. She said, "Then we'll take legal action for our portion of Evelyn's estate. Cameron deserves 50% of everything. We're informed about the life insurance policy." Evelyn had arranged for it all to go to me. That straightforward fact punctured my bravado for a brief moment. That can't be true. We're seeking advice from an attorney. I pressed the panic button as Laura's voice hit a volatile pitch. Wes Carter returned with additional staff, their figures blocking the entrance to the office. Several co-workers clustered in the corridor, attracted by the uproar. "I'm not going anywhere," Laura yelled as the security team drew near. This was robbery. This was mistreatment. Though her resistance gained nothing, her shouting was relentless. Everyone in the office could hear her shouts and allegations as she was ushered out into the reception area. My son's shame reached another level, seeing his wife physically escorted out of the job he once called his own. Once everything was quiet, he was left with me. His final effort at emotional blackmail came as a hushed plea. "I am your only remaining family." He intended those words to devastate me, but instead, they brought everything into stark focus. I gazed at this person, a stranger who had mimicked my son's identity for 33 years, and told him what he truly needed to hear. "No, you're just someone who once had been my son." Cameron's features collapsed in distress. For a brief instant, I glimpsed the young child who used to dash toward me for a hug after school. That glimpse faded quickly, replaced by a self-important stranger. Without saying anything further, I watched as he departed. I maintained a composed and professional tone as I reassured my concerned staff that this was a personal situation and would not disrupt our company's operations. The majority nodded knowingly, having seen Cameron's inadequate work for years. I told security, "Please make sure that Evelyn Foster is never permitted in this building again." Sitting alone in my office, I became aware that my hands were shaking just a little. The most difficult step was complete. My gaze settled on the photograph of Evelyn on my desk. I hoped she would understand. After booting up my computer, I began searching for estate planning lawyers. It was time for me to move forward with the next step. I set a meeting with Stephen Lynn for that same afternoon, and then caught sight of Cameron's birthday, which was scheduled on my calendar for in 2 months. I erased it permanently. The renowned law firm of Lynn & Partners occupied the top floor of the tallest skyscraper in Eugene. At 3:15 p.m., I stepped into the reception area with my leather briefcase, which held Evelyn Foster's will, insurance forms, and the financial files that would alter the course of my family's life. The receptionist instantly recognized me and led me straight to Stephen Lynn's corner office. Golden afternoon light poured through lofty windows that overlooked downtown Eugene, highlighting shelves packed with legal volumes and active casework that lent the space a sense of gravity. I watched as Stephen stood from behind his polished mahogany desk, clear concern in his eyes. We had maintained a friendship for 20 years. He had managed Evelyn's will, formed my company, and guided me through numerous sensitive legal situations. "How are you doing, Alan?" His words were filled with true compassion. I turned down his offer for coffee and got comfortable in the leather chair facing his desk. I had to update my estate planning. Stephen Lynn's demeanor became strictly business. Naturally, revising the listed beneficiaries after Evelyn Foster's death was routine, but not this time. I popped open my briefcase and withdrew the paperwork. I intended to exclude Cameron Blake entirely. That statement struck Stephen as if I'd delivered a palpable shock. His mask of professionalism slipped as he contemplated what that meant. He looked at me and said, "I need to know what's behind this choice." I recounted Cameron's absence at the funeral, relaying his precise comments about Laura's birthday gathering with measured calm. Stephen's features grew more troubled with every detail I shared. As Evelyn's friend and the longtime lawyer for our family, he recognized just how severe Cameron's actions were. "I want to draft an entirely new will," I insisted. "The main beneficiary should be the Evelyn Foster Legacy Foundation." Stephen leaned in closer, his worries now focused on the possible legal consequences. "Alan, part of my duty is to be sure you're fully clear-headed in making this call. I've never been more resolved about anything in my life." I laid out my plan: provide educational scholarships to children in need, support cancer grants for research, initiatives that Evelyn Foster had championed throughout her life. Cameron Blake is specifically left out, as are any of his possible descendants. Stephen Lynn's respect grew as I went over how I set up the foundation. Placing all the company's assets into an irrevocable trust would safeguard them from future litigation. I would manage everything for as long as I lived, with the foundation taking possession after I passed away. "We'll also have to update all insurance policy beneficiaries," Stephen remarked, carefully jotting down each detail. "This level of planning is exceptional." I had decided that our family house would be sold and the proceeds directed to the foundation. Evelyn's jewelry would be sold at auction for charitable causes. The one item not included was Evelyn's wedding band, which would be interred with me when my life ended. "And Cameron's childhood keepsakes?" Stephen inquired softly. I replied, "They'll be donated." I am purposefully erasing Cameron from every aspect of my life. Stephen carried out his responsibilities by asking whether I was of sound mind and competent to make my decisions. The logical answers I provided, combined with my detailed strategy, showed I was thinking clearly. Over time, his attitude shifted from that of a worried friend to one of respect as a colleague. The official signing event required the presence of 2 legal witnesses from Lynn & Partners. Although my signature remained calm and consistent, the importance of each choice felt immense. Stephen clarified that these papers would become legally binding immediately. Cameron was now entirely excluded from the inheritance. I insisted that Cameron receive an official notification about this change. I made my instructions unmistakably clear. Further safeguards were swiftly put into place. Powers of attorney were revised to remove Cameron from any position of authority. New medical directives ensured he was excluded from all healthcare decision-making, along with a living will that clearly specified my wishes for care. Stephen meticulously recorded proof of my sound mental state. I planned to visit banks early the following day to revise every account. Cameron would no longer be named beneficiary on my retirement and investment assets. Stephen volunteered his assistance in working with the banks and financial services. An unexpected calm settled over me as I set plans for the foundation. I selected Stephen Lynn to join as a trustee, outlined the makeup of the board, and started drafting a list of the first scholarship winners. Evelyn's legacy would be remembered through academic support, a cause she profoundly cherished. Evelyn would be proud of this foundation, Stephen Lynn said as our meeting wrapped up. She had always placed immense value on education and supporting those in need. For the first time in the past few days, I experienced true fulfillment, rather than a relentless sense of purpose. Stephen Lynn recognized that my actions weren't fueled by vengeance, but by a need for fairness. My evolution from a mourning parent to a committed benefactor had come full circle. Outside Lynn and Partners, we exchanged a firm handshake. My phone displayed 3 missed calls from Cameron Blake, a clear sign that he was beginning to grasp the gravity of what was happening. I erased the voicemails without even pressing play and headed for my vehicle. There was still another chapter ahead. The refined lobby of the Lakeview Country Club enveloped me in its customary comfort. Rich mahogany walls, glittering crystal lights, and stately oil paintings of the original founders exuded an impression of generational wealth and unwavering tradition. In my role as treasurer for the monthly board session, I had been pacing these corridors for 13 years. 10 board members sat clustered around the gleaming meeting table, carrying on with standard club discussions before our formal gathering. The aroma of leather chairs and brewing coffee mixed with quiet talks about the latest happenings. Our board president, Richard Simmons, came up to me with heartfelt compassion. I told Alan the service for Evelyn was truly lovely. She would have appreciated it. I thanked him kindly for sending the flowers. Clarice Morton, Evelyn's sister, and a longtime participant, entered our discussion. My eyes kept searching for Cameron during the ceremony. Why wasn't he there? The question I'd thoroughly anticipated filled the room. I hesitated, but quickly realized that honesty would honor Evelyn's memory more than courtesy. I was stunned when Cameron made the decision not to come to his mother's memorial. A hush washed through our group like waves in a pond. Clarice's expression lost all color. Was I really saying he had decided not to come? I relayed Cameron's exact explanation about Laura's birthday celebration taking precedence. The open contempt on the board members' faces revealed everything about their morals Cameron had so clearly walked away from. I was listening in from the hallway as Nancy Simmons immediately began making calls. Within just a few minutes, she was already contacting people. News of the situation reached the Ladies' Bridge group in less than 60 minutes and then swept through Eugene's upper social circles with astonishing speed. When I got home, I had no idea about the chaos I had set off among these circles. The aftermath first hit my wife, Laura, early the following day. Her instructor at the upscale yoga studio told her partway through class that she needed to leave. The frosty explanation was, "We prefer members whose families reflect strong values." My son, Cameron, had his lunch invitation at Lakeview Country Club canceled after a courteous yet decidedly clear phone call. The spot we always occupied at Mancini's Trattoria was now permanently unavailable to us. Laura's bewilderment turned to mounting frustration as she started noticing a consistent trend. On Saturday morning, my son suffered his most embarrassing setback yet. The other golfers in his group gave obvious excuses and cut their round short. The manager of the pro shop gently suggested that he might want to try another club. I returned to my vehicle alone, slowly realizing that everyone knew about the events at the funeral. My wife's attempt to shop at Eleanor's boutique was abruptly ruined. Any fantasies she still held were shattered. The friendly welcome from the sales associates had vanished, replaced by chilly indifference. I ran into puzzling holdups with my credit application. The store manager even hinted that I should consider shopping at a different place. My son, Cameron Blake, experienced total solitude in his career as well. Interviews he had arranged were canceled without explanation. People he had once done business with no longer responded to his calls. My networking lunch at the Eugene Business League grew tense and was cut short. Prospective employers had already caught wind of my situation even before I could meet them. The last blow came at Bella's studio, where my daughter-in-law Laura's routine appointment was abruptly canceled. When she overheard other customers gossiping about her uncaring husband, she left the salon in tears. The society columnist from the local newspaper noted their unexpected absence at my wife's memorial. Members of the church congregation made their disapproval clear. Old friends went out of their way to steer clear of Cameron and Laura at social gatherings. Cameron grew frantic trying to clear things up, but no one would listen. When he said that I was making too much of things, not a soul believed him. The close-knit community of Eugene had already made up its mind about us. Laura's emotional collapse was, by then, inevitable. She confronted Cameron about the disgrace he had brought upon us, insisting that he resolve the issue at once. When I admitted I was at a loss for a solution, she warned me that she would leave unless things got better. I learned about these social repercussions from several people, and I felt a sense of satisfaction at how justice seemed to unfold naturally. Eugene's values matched mine: unwavering family bonds, reverence for those who have passed on, and fundamental human kindness. My son, Cameron, had betrayed every one of those principles. The community was preserving Evelyn Foster's legacy by shunning those who failed to respect her. My phone rang as I was having breakfast. The bank manager had a tone of measured professionalism in his voice. Cameron and Laura Blake's mortgage payment is now a month past due. I am still listed as the guarantor on their loan. Is that right? I hesitated, weighing what this could mean. I'd like to set up a meeting early the following day to review revisions to my guarantees. Applying financial strain would only complete what being ostracized had already begun. At 8:55 a.m., I entered Summit State Bank's marble entrance, passing by oil frame portraits depicting the original members whose wealth was built on integrity and devotion to their families. The office of Bank Manager Frank Bennett offered a view of the Willamette River, where barges transported goods that had contributed to Eugene's growth for generations. Frank's anxiousness was obvious as he examined the files for Cameron Blake and Laura Blake, laid out across his polished mahogany desk. Stacks of mortgage paperwork, loans, and guarantee forms documented their financial reliance, which was about to reach its conclusion. I was grateful that Alan Foster managed to be here with such little notice. Frank's tone was stiff with forced professionalism. My son's mortgage is currently 2 months overdue. The outstanding balance is $16,200. I remained entirely calm, my fingers intertwined. I realize you require the payment I promised to cover. That's correct, just as you have for the past 2 months. Frank's presumption lingered in the office, as tense as the smell before a blaze. I am revoking my guarantee, effective now. The banker's expression drained of color. I don't follow. I have backed this loan for 7 years. I provided pre-prepared legal forms from Lynn & Partners. Everything is in proper order, as you'll see. 30 days advance notice, as the law states, is included. Frank made a panicked call to the bank's legal counsel, while I silently observed morning commuters making their way over the bridge. Evelyn and I had taken that walk more times than I could count. The attorney's voice over the speakerphone confirmed my worst suspicion. Legally, I was completely within my rights to make the withdrawal. So, we'll have to initiate the foreclosure process, Frank said in a defeated tone. I understand. Please move it along as soon as you can. While this unfolded, my son, Cameron Blake, was enduring his 8th job interview in the past 2 weeks. The interviewer greeted him with the same chilly attitude I had come to anticipate on his behalf. My usual rehearsed answers about pursuing fresh opportunities met an unresponsive audience who already knew about the funeral. Thank you for your time, Mr. Foster. We will follow up. There was an unmistakable sense of finality in the courteous rejection. My increasing sense of hopelessness was clear from the way my shoulders drooped as I made my way to my battered Toyota. The BMW had been repossessed by the lender a few weeks ago. That afternoon, Laura discovered a credit card emergency at Woodard's department store when her high-status card was declined during a simple purchase. Mascara to replace the tube I'd used up in tears. There has to be an error, I insisted to the flustered sales clerk. My irate phone call to the credit card support line uncovered the explanation. Your co-signer has revoked his backing. The card was locked until the remaining balance was fully cleared. Laura's embarrassment only deepened in public as onlookers watched her dispute with the representative. The unmistakable truth became plain. Alan Foster had deliberately dismantled every financial fallback I had presumed would always be there. Cameron and Laura came home to discover the power had been shut off. The utility provider's notice showed overdue charges totaling more than $950. My unsuccessful attempts to arrange a payment plan ended as soon as they learned I was no longer employed. Our first evening lit by candles was an intense introduction to our new circumstances. I watched Laura pace back and forth restlessly in our dimly lit living room, the sound of her designer heels echoing on the wood as she berated me for ruining everything. My son's feeble efforts to shift responsibility to Alan Foster for acting out of spite were only met with her escalating panic. With pure malice, she warned, "Either you fix this, or I'm leaving." Every application for credit that I frantically submitted was rejected immediately. Without reliable work, my debt compared to my income had spiraled out of control. Laura's credit cards had all reached their limits and couldn't help us any further. We talked about bankruptcy for the first time, both of us truly terrified at the prospect. The profits I made from selling our expensive belongings in the garage were laughably small. Wedding presents that our guests had spent hundreds on ended up being sold for $25. People I once considered friends simply drove by, never stopping to help. Laura stood by as her jewelry was sold to total strangers, while I ended up selling my golf equipment to a young kid. The BMW was towed away in full view of the neighbors, making for quite a spectacle for everyone around. My sense of shame hit rock bottom as I retrieved my belongings under the repo man's impatient gaze. Laura shouted at the tow truck driver, while people in the neighborhood peered through their curtains and from their windows. I drove past their house that evening, feeling a sense of gratification as I took in the obvious disarray. This wasn't an act of malice. It was simply a matter of consequences. My wife, Evelyn, had always instilled in me that every action carries its own outcome. My son, Cameron, was now discovering that reality for himself. When Cameron called, pleading for an in-person conversation and insisting it was urgent, I agreed to meet at Turner Park the following afternoon, the very spot where I had taught him to ride a bike nearly 30 years ago, back when his gaze toward me was filled with affection rather than calculation. After I ended the call, I gazed at a framed picture of a young Cameron on his bicycle, thinking back on those less complicated days. Then I placed the photo face down on my desk. 7 months after my meeting at Summit State Bank, the county property auction was held on the county courthouse steps. From the opposite side of the street, seated in my black sedan, I watched as 431 Birch Lane, once the cherished home of Cameron and Laura Blake, was listed at a public auction. The county auctioneer recited the official description with meticulous formality, as a modest group of property investors and spectators looked on. My son and his wife stood a little distance from the others, and Laura's tears glittered under the early sunlight. Using my binoculars, I observed their ultimate embarrassment take place. Opening bid will be $240,000 for this 4-bedroom colonial home, the auctioneer proclaimed. A lady in a navy suit lifted her hand with self-assuredness. I anxiously tried to determine who the mysterious woman was, quietly whispering to Laura. The auction price climbed to $255,000 with only 2 bidders remaining, the unknown lady and a well-known contractor from town. When my attorney, Stephen Lynn, appeared and gave the woman a slight nod, my growing doubts suddenly turned into horrified certainty. "That's my dad's attorney," I muttered to Laura, my words audible in the hushed group. The auction proceeded with cold efficiency as my entire world unraveled moment by moment. $290,000, announced the woman wearing a navy suit. Once, twice, and then it was sold. My knees buckled beneath me. Laura's anguished cry echoed behind me. The words, "This is our home," rang throughout the county courthouse as the auctioneer's gavel sealed our fate. I got out of my vehicle and made my way up the county courthouse stairs, my arrival making Cameron realize the full extent of my 7-month plan. The withdrawal I arranged, the flawless timing, the bid set to precisely cover the existing mortgage. Each step I took was crafted with methodical accuracy. The bidder, previously unidentified, turned out to be Abigail Price, my reliable secretary, who was representing the recently established Price Realty, LLC. I watched as Cameron moved unsteadily toward me, trembling, his hushed words struggling to come out. "How could you do something like this to us?" he asked. I kept my composure and replied, "I did nothing. It was the bank that acted." His frantic appeals about Evelyn's, the way Evelyn Foster always cherished her garden and adored this house, were met by my own unfeeling reaction. Evelyn isn't here to witness what I have turned into. Laura's last outburst exploded in a furious charge, her words full of accusations of abuse toward the elderly and questioning my sanity. Stephen Lynn recorded her fit of rage while security led her away from where I stood. Everything that happened in those moments stood as clear proof of their real nature. 14 days later, the moving van looked laughably tiny compared to what our old life had been. Laura stuffed her clothes into bags with barely controlled fury, while I gently bundled up Evelyn's crystal vase, the final link I had to my late mother. The people who used to live nearby watched from a distance and didn't lift a finger. They were now completely cut off socially. That night, Laura delivered her ultimatum. I'm done trying to live this way. When she admitted to speaking with her old boyfriend, it felt like the final sign that our relationship was hopeless. I had married for security and privilege, not to end up in this situation. What she said next hurt most of all. Your father actually knew us. I spent my last night by myself in the vacant home, wandering through spaces that echoed with memories of happier years. In a drawer in the kitchen, I came across Evelyn Foster's secret message. Cameron, remember that you are loved. For the very first time, true tears of remorse fell when I realized what I had actually given up. I accepted the keys from Abigail Price with a sense of quiet fulfillment. Choosing to restore the house and offer it to a worthy family felt like closure in the truest sense. Evelyn would have endorsed such fairness. Later that night, Cameron called from a payphone outside a rundown motel, since his cell phone couldn't connect. The phone rang at my house, but when I saw Cameron's name on the caller ID, I let it go to voicemail. Resolving things between us could wait a little longer. Cameron appeared at my doorstep at 7:30 p.m. on a chilly December night, 2 months after the house had been lost. For a moment, his finger hesitated above the doorbell. I stood by the living room window for a full minute, debating whether or not to respond. When I eventually answered the door, I made no move to welcome him in. Seeing my son Cameron Blake on my doorstep left me stunned. He was unshaven, clad in rumpled jeans and a creased shirt. It looked as if he had aged by 5 years over just 7 months. The weight I'd lost and the defeated slump in my shoulders were a stark contrast to the cockiness I used to project. Dad, I realize how badly I messed up, Cameron said, his voice trembling as he began what sounded like a practiced apology about finally recognizing his errors. I stood in the doorway, listening without comment as he described living in a small studio above a laundromat, earning minimum wage at Henry's Fuel Mart, and how Laura had left him for her former boyfriend, a man who ran a chain of restaurants. I finally understand what's really important, he said next. Then he tried a different approach, hinting that I was probably lonely in this large home, and volunteering to be the son that Evelyn always wished I had become. I could identify each tactic he was employing to steer the conversation. Out of nowhere, I asked, "When is your mother's birthday?" Cameron hesitated before answering incorrectly. June 15th, he said. I asked about her preferred flower next. Roses? He guessed, again missing the mark. Evelyn had always favored daisies. That was when it hit me. Cameron had never truly understood her. The irritation building as I questioned him further started to show who he really was. I noticed the old self-important voice returning. "This is absurd," I protested. "Just tell me what you want from me." After a while, what he actually wanted finally became clear to me. All right, yes, I do need assistance. There were threats of eviction, repeated vows to repay me once he was stable, and reminders that I had enough money to support relatives. Cameron continued to treat me like I was a bottomless source of cash. His closing attempt at guilt brought up Evelyn Foster. My mother would be devastated if she saw us fighting. She always advocated for new beginnings. I miss her as well, Alan. She meant a lot to both of us. There was a brief instant when I hesitated, thinking of my wife's generous nature. It then struck me that this was precisely what Evelyn had dreaded. "Do you want to understand what your mother truly believed?" I asked. I retrieved Evelyn's secret diary from her bedside table and read her own passages aloud. "I'm afraid Cameron cares only about our wealth. What if my son is incapable of genuine affection?" Cameron's stunned silence spoke volumes to me. "Evelyn died knowing what you really are," I continued in an even tone. "She changed her will before dying. She left you nothing because she knew you'd waste it." Cameron's expression finally gave way completely. His furious threats to challenge the will and accuse me of senility exposed just how spiteful he was. Hearing his last harsh words, "I hope you die alone in this house," left me fully content to have seen his true self. I took a step back and gently shut the door. Cameron hammered on it for several minutes as I walked away to the kitchen and continued sipping my tea as if nothing out of the ordinary had taken place. Once his car had disappeared down the street, I settled into my wife's favorite chair, clutching her journal and experiencing a sense of true calm for the first time since she passed away. Gazing at the photo from our wedding, I murmured softly, "It's over, dearest." 11 months later, I wandered through Sunset Memorial Cemetery during a bright April morning, bringing some fresh daisies to place at my wife Evelyn's grave. Songbirds chirped among the oaks, while early summer blossoms lined the paths where I strolled. I looked better and felt more at ease than I had in several years. Lowering myself beside Evelyn's smooth granite stone, I carefully set down the daisies and quietly shared updates about the Evelyn Foster Legacy Foundation's successful first year. 20 scholarships were granted to students who had truly earned the honor. A total of $175,000 was contributed to cancer research in Evelyn's memory. Plans for the community center dedication on Evelyn's birthday were well underway. My son is now working at Henry's Fuel Mart on Route 99, I announced in a neutral tone. His divorce had finalized. Laura Blake remarried the proprietor of her restaurant. My son ended up living in total isolation from others and faced ongoing financial hardship. I took no pleasure in what he endured. I simply felt that fairness had been served. As I left the cemetery, I made a stop at Sunrise Cafe. I saw Cameron behind the counter, his uniform noticeably stained. When our eyes met across the cafe, I could see the mix of shock and embarrassment on his face as I calmly asked for coffee, showing him the same respect I would show any employee. "How are you doing, Alan?" Cameron's voice actually sounded truly humble for once. "I'm well, thank you." "I know sorry isn't enough," he murmured. "No, it isn't." Cameron's honesty took me off guard. I finally realized what I let slip away. It was never about the money, was it? You wanted my love, not just my support. Your mother managed to win that too. For the first time, Cameron's tears seemed sincere. "I did what I believed was necessary," I told him. "Evelyn would have agreed. I don't regret any part of it." I understood that Cameron accepted everything. I had truly earned it all. That's correct. I did. When Cameron wondered if redemption was possible, I responded truthfully, "I'm uncertain. Perhaps." I had to demonstrate real change. Not just in what I said, my actions needed to speak for themselves. I explained how my life had changed. I spent time volunteering at the community center, building new friendships among fellow volunteers, and enjoying Sunday meals with the Olson family, whose daughter was awarded a scholarship. I had begun seeing Grace Wilkins, a compassionate widow I met at church. My days now felt meaningful and surrounded by authentic connection. Visiting Emily Harper, our very first scholarship winner, brought me genuine fulfillment. She expressed deep gratitude for her chance to attend nursing school. She had even written a heartfelt letter in Evelyn Foster's memory on the Evelyn Foster Legacy Foundation's website. Evelyn's legacy continued to thrive through helping others learn. On my drive home, I passed by Cameron's former residence. I noticed that the Santos family had turned it into a warm, loving home. Mr. Santos waved from the garden that Evelyn once cared for. Children played in the same spot where I remembered Cameron playing years ago. The home represented all that Evelyn had cherished. That night, I cooked a meal in the kitchen I had once shared with her, setting a single place but feeling no sorrow. My phone rang. It was Grace asking about our plans for the weekend. I grinned, feeling the first sincere happiness I had experienced since Evelyn passed away. Standing outside at sundown, trimming Evelyn's roses, I experienced the tranquility of someone who had struggled for what was right and prevailed. My clear conviction that I had respected my wife's memory gave me total contentment. Turning in early, I enjoyed my first restful sleep in 2 years, dreaming of Evelyn beaming at me and saying, "You chose well. I'm proud of you." Justice had been done. Love had demanded difficult decisions, but they were the right ones. Rest peacefully, my dearest.